Welcome to the SnydeReport podcast. I am your host, Gary Snyder. My guest today is former two-term governor, two-term U.S. Senator Evan Bayh. Senator, welcome.
Thank you, Gary. It's great to be with you and your listeners and viewers.
Well, we appreciate the opportunity to talk to you. Before we get started, though, I do need to mention that Robin Winston is the sponsor of this podcast. Robin does a lot of great work in the state and also sponsors this podcast and the newsletter. So we thank him. He helps make all this possible. So again, thanks to Robin Winston. I called him Robin Williams like the first time I did this.
Well, Robin, I never knew Robin Williams, but I've known Robin Winston a long time, and Robin Winston is a good man.
He is. Well, Senator, what have you been up to?
Well, trying to make sense of some of the things that are going on in the world, but mostly trying to be a good father to my 29-year-old twin sons, which never ceases to amaze me. They're young adults now, so they don't need my help quite as much, even though I find great joy trying to provide it, and trying to be a good friend to my friends. I find now that I'm 69, trying to be a good parent and a good friend gives me the most satisfaction in life. And I should say a good citizen too. I still care deeply about our state. I care deeply about our country, and so I try and stay abreast of those things.
We have a picture of your two sons up on the newsletter in their military uniforms, and the feedback I get is they can't be that old.
Well, I have the same reaction because, they were on the front page of Susan and I were the first governor and first lady to have children since 1830. So it was, big news and happy news. And so it was on the front page of the newspaper. So a lot of the people remember the boys that age. I still remember the now mayor of Indianapolis overcame this, but he was my chief of staff at the time, and Susan was in labor 25 hours, and so a long time. And so about halfway, and the press was all over the place, TV cameras, they were all staking out the hospital, reporting on how frequent her contractions were. It was kind of amazing, really. And so at one point, Joe Hogshead had to go down to address the media for the 6 o'clock news, and he looked out at the cameras, and this was on live TV all across central Indiana, and he said, "Mrs. Bayh has been in labor for 15 hours. She is resting comfortably." At which point, every woman across our state started throwing things at the television, saying only a man. But he's recovered from that. The boys are doing great. I was really proud that both of them chose, after doing quite well in academically in college, to serve our country in the military. I think that speaks highly of their character, and so I thought people might enjoy seeing that picture. Just a word of warning to you and to the folks who are going to be watching this. I may send in some additional stuff because after a bit here to change out that picture. We were all inducted into the Indiana Society of Pioneers a while ago. And in order to qualify for that, depending on what part of our state you hail from, they have to be able to trace your family back to the 1830s or the 1840s. And we're from Western Indiana, over Vigo County, Clay County, over in that part of our state, Putnam County. And they traced our ancestors all the way back to the 1790s. I'm the 6th generation. My sons are the 7th generation to be born and live in our state. So we're kind of proud of that. And I may include in there, Gary, that Birch Bayh Sr., my father's father, my grandfather, the great-grandfather of my sons, actually has a more important position in Hoosierdom than being a governor or senator. Birch Bayh Sr. is in the Indiana Basketball Hall of Fame.
Wow. Did not know that one.
Yeah, it doesn't get more Hoosier than that. He was a very famous referee back in the 1930s. He refereed 7 consecutive boys championship games back then, very often with a guy named Vaughn Russell. And so, matter of fact, John Wooden, the famous coach, played his high school ball in Martinsville, went on to Purdue, and then, of course, famous, one of the most successful college coaches of all time out at UCLA. He came back for when they dedicated a new gym down in Martinsville, and I was there. While I was governor, and I went up to shake the coach's hand, and he sat there and he looked up at me and he said, "Bye." He said, your grandfather blew a fair whistle. So that was a nice thing to hear from someone like Johnny Wooden. In any event, I may share that with you because it's kind of fun. It shows our lineage all the way back. You can kind of trace it all the way back. So it's kind of fun I thought people might enjoy seeing that.
I think you can trace mine back to one branch of a family tree. I am a first generation Hoosier, at least on my mom's side. So,
well, we welcome you, Gary. But I guess in our case, our family, now Christopher Bayh immigrated to this country from Germany in 1864. On my father's side, they're Hollingsworth Wards. My middle name is Evans, so hence the Evanses. That side, the English side, sort of goes back a little further. But Christopher Bayh got off the ship in New York in 1864, found his way to our state to Spencer. And Bayh's dry goods store, hardware store, was just off the town square there at Spencer for a long time. And so I guess our family came to Indiana, liked Indiana. We haven't moved around a whole lot.
Well, let me ask you this, because I know we talked about your two boys in a phone conversation recently. You had one in the Army, an intelligence officer, correct?
Obviously, takes after his mom. He's smart.
And the other one is a Marine infantry, correct?
Bo served in the Marine Corps. Yes, he was a captain in the infantry. So he commanded 100 and then later 200 Marines, and they did desert warfare training and jungle training. He was deployed to the Pentagon and then over after the Russians invaded Ukraine, which, just for the record, they did invade Ukraine.
A lot of people forget that these days.
Yeah, he volunteered to go over there, and he was at a top. He's got his. It's reassuring as a parent when your children get their top secret clearances. It means the FBI have checked them out. So they either were more discreet with how they grew up, or their roommates in college were more tight-lipped than mine.
Well, it's funny because I was an infantryman just in the Army, so obviously the intelligence in my family went away from me because
no. Well, I asked Bo. I said, "Why the Marine Corps?" And he said, "Because it's hard." And I said, "Why the infantry?" And he said, "Every commandant in the history of the United States Marine Corps has come out of the infantry."
Okay.
So not that he aspired to be the commandant someday, but he thought that he wanted to do it the hard way. So he went to officer candidate school. He then went to the basic school, and then he specialized in infantry. And only half, if I can do a little bragging, Gary, only half of the Marine Corps officers who attempt to become infantry officers make it because it's so physically demanding. Since you're kind of commanding people in life and death situations, if you're in combat, they wanted to know who could perform well and make wise decisions if they'd had no sleep, no food, that kind of thing. So they're pretty hard on.
Now, before we get in any further, I want to, and I've told you this before, my Evan Bayh story. I was a freshman at Ball State University. I can't remember if I was coming back from football practice, getting my ankles taped or lunch or whatever, but I get off the elevator at the 5th floor, I believe, 6th floor maybe, of Hurlbut Hall, and waiting in front of the elevator is a young man running for Secretary of State of Indiana, shakes my hand and says, "I'd appreciate your vote. I'm Evan Bayh. I'm running for Secretary of State." That was 1986.
Wow. Great memories there. Well, that was obviously a grassroots campaign with the candidates standing out in front of a dorm asking for students' votes. I have a fair amount of nostalgia for those days. It wasn't all about money and advertising, or at least there was more of the human interaction involved in those days. So
I remember it, and I'm 56 years old now. So
wow,
it's been etched in my memory for all these years. So thank you for doing that.
I had the privilege of our viewers here today may enjoy this. The Indiana State Fair sent me an invitation, 6-8 months ago. You may have covered some of this in your page you put out. And they invited every living governor to attend to raise money for the state fair. We'd have a big thing there in the big pavilion. And I told them, I said, "I'd be happy to come, but if you want a really good turnout, get some of the dead guys to show up. People will really turn out to see that." So in any event, I showed up, And there were four of us there, Governor Holcomb, Governor Pence, Governor Daniels, and then me. And I was all at the end because they did it, based upon the timeline of when you served. And I realized there have been a couple of young people there who told me they didn't know when I served and so forth. So I started off by saying, they kind of went down the line and it got to me. And I said, well, for those of you who are young and may not recall, I served in the Jurassic period when there were mastodons and woolly mammoths and saber-toothed tigers and even Democrat governors inhabiting the state of Indiana. And the crowd had to be 90% Republican, but it got a pretty good chuckle out of them.
Well, my first question to you, and I'm going to include your family in this a little bit. Your dad was obviously a U.S. Senator here in Indiana, authored 2 constitutional amendments. What was it like growing up in Indiana? And they say never follow a Hall of Fame coach. Well, you were pretty much following your Hall of Fame dad as a U.S. Senator. So talk a little bit about growing up, Evan Bayh, in Indiana, and what it was like being a U.S. Senator with your dad having such a great history here in the state.
Well, that's a great question, Gary. And from my observation, the children of public figures tend to go one of two directions. Some get really turned off by it for a variety of reasons and just don't want to have anything to do with it. But then some, probably not a majority, but some admire what their parents did. And I fell into that category. I was an only child. I loved both my parents, which, by the way, my mother was a little ahead of her time. She was very accomplished. She was governor of Girls State and then later president of Girls Nation. And, she'd been growing up later, might have been a senator or governor herself. She taught down at Hoosier Girls State for 18 years and really enjoyed that. In any event, I admired what he did. So around the dinner table, we would talk about what was going on in the world. And those were tumultuous times, a little bit like we're experiencing today. The civil rights movement was in full swing. The Vietnam War, unfortunately, it was raging. We had degrees of instability and violence in some of our urban areas. And it was just a lot of changes in society. My father was trying to grapple with that to make sure that everyone had an opportunity and was pursuing equal rights for women and so forth. And I admired his, what I admired, Gary? I admired his desire not just to take out a life, but to give back and to try and find fulfillment by enabling others to make the most of their lives. And I thought he didn't live his life, about money and that sort of thing. He lived his life about trying to help other people help themselves. And I thought, if I could do anything with my life, it would be an honorable thing to try and do that too. Unfortunately, 5 out of 6 times the people of our state gave me that chance. And I'm eternally grateful to Hoosiers for giving me that opportunity to do what I could to help us too. So I love my parents. I admired them and just sort of adopted their value system of trying to serve others. And it's not what you take out of life that matters. It's what you put back in.
Now, was there ever any pressure on you? Like, hey, Evan, your dad got 2 constitutional amendments passed. He authored 2 of them. How many are you going to do? Huh?
No, nothing like that. My parents were very good about that. And as a matter of fact, my father, to get back to that Secretary of State's race, Gary, when I told him I was thinking about that, he said, well, I'd be happy to help you in any way I can. But if you're going to do this, you need to do it for your own reasons, because it's right for you and not just because you love me or you think you have something to live up to because of the kind of family that you grew up in. You need to chart your own course and make your own life. So they were very good about not placing any kind of those psychological pressures on me. Al Gore, on the other hand, he grew up in a family. His parents would go around introducing him when he was 10 years old, 12 years old, as, Al Jr. is going to be a future president of the United States. And I've often wondered what kind of psychological baggage that might put on somebody. But, to get back to your original question, Gary, it's not uncommon for young people to want to go into their parents' line of work. Not everybody does, but a fair number do. And it's usually because they love and admire their parents and It's what they know, and it makes sense for them. So no, I felt no pressure whatsoever. Matter
Okay.
of fact, my mother admonished me. She said, "Look, if you want to do that, okay." She'd passed away by the time she passed away in 1979, which was 7 years before I ran for Secretary of State. She used to tell me that go out and establish yourself, become financially secure so you can take care of your family. And then if you want to do politics and public service, go for it. I didn't take her advice. It worked out well, but my mother was a wise woman. That's the advice I'd give my sons too.
You know, I find that my mother, and I want to wish her a happy birthday today. Today's her 70, oh my gosh, 76th, maybe 5th.
Happy birthday. I join you in singing a song, Gary, but I want to scare your viewers.
You know, I was singing a song once. I was coming on the air. I was on WBAT in Marion, and I was kind of singing the intro song. And I had one phone call light up on my little screen, and I answered it, and it was my wife going, "Don't ever do that again on the radio."
Well, we can all count on our spouses to tell us the truth.
Yeah. Oh, and then some. So looking back at your years of governor, and you can do it separately or all together as governor and a U.S. senator. What do you consider your biggest accomplishments from both?
Well, I was asked that question at the Indiana State Fair. We were all asked that. And let me give some good news to your viewers today. We live in very partisan times, very divisive times, a lot of, anger and disagreement around, even maybe hatred for our fellow Americans, which I think is most unfortunate. But at the State Fair, I answered that question by saying I was privileged to do a number of things while I was governor. But if I had to pick one, it would be the 21st Century Scholars Program, which, as you know, maybe many of your viewers know, enables less fortunate kids who sign a pledge to not be involved with drug or alcohol and graduate from high school. It guarantees them a full college scholarship to the public university of their choice. And those scholarships are transferable if they want to go to somewhere like Butler or Notre Dame, DePaul, somewhere like that.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what, Gary? Again, this. So that sounds like kind of a progressive thing to do, right? Enabling less fortunate kids, if they do right, to have a chance to go to college and make the most of themselves and lead a productive life and all that. It sounds like sort of a typical Democratic idea. This audience of 90% Republicans spontaneously applauded. It was great. I mean, they embraced that idea. And so every once in a while, someone will come up to me and say, "Thank you, they're a 21st century scholar." And because 100,000 or more have now gone on to college because of that. And I always tell them, "No, thank you. You're the one who's making the most of this opportunity, not us." So that would be that. In the Senate, not as much happens in the Senate. I'd have to think a little bit longer about that. But I was there during a tumultuous time, the first impeachment of a president since 1868, the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression, and the largest attack on the country, 9/11 since Pearl Harbor. So there was a lot happened, and we responded to all those things in ways that I was on the Intelligence Committee for 10 years, made the country more secure, combating terrorism, tried to make the banking system and the finance system more stable to help the economy, some of those sorts of things. I enjoyed trying to do that to create opportunity for our people. But I will say, Congress has just become much too divisive, too polarized, and I think most Americans probably feel the same way.
Do you think that's from, I guess, the primaries, the states, in a lot of states, the primaries pretty much become the general election, and that you have too many running to the far left or the far right to get anything done once they do get to where they're going, whether it's Congress or the U.S. Senate?
I think that's a huge part of it. The gerrymander has really met in the House of Representatives. Out of 435 seats, maybe at the most, like 40 of them are actually closely contested in the fall election. That means that the real elections for 90% of them are the primaries. And so if you're in the Democratic Party, you tend to go to the left. And if you're in the Republican Party, you go to the right. And, they raise money by doing outrageous things that then get attention. They can go online and get their really fired up supporters to send them $25 and that kind of thing, or maybe they get on cable news. So that's part of it. But another part of it, Gary, is that the public itself is more divided. And there are a number of reasons for that. We don't really have many experiences in common anymore. As you pointed out at the top of the show, both my sons went into the United States military after college. That's really unusual. Mm-hmm. Fewer than 1% of Americans today go into the military. Back in our parents' or grandparents' time, that was a fairly common experience. You get Republicans, Democrats, liberals, conservatives, all they're going through basic training together, all, going through all that, maybe even fighting on behalf of our country. And that tends to be a experience that brings you together with common experience. Today, fewer and fewer Americans have common experiences. They have segregated by neighborhoods, by schools, by places of worship. And there have been books written about this. One was called Bowling Alone, about the demise of bowling leagues. That was something people used to have in common. Don't do that much anymore. But the final thing I'd say is, and I've turned off the sound on this, but I'll hold up this thing, this or online, people are choosing their own reality today. And so you can, Daniel Patrick Moynihan he's a very smart senator, Harvard professor from New York. He had a famous saying that you're entitled to your own opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts. Well, today people are making up their own facts, and you can sit down and negotiate over something and split the difference, and each side gets something, and you work on the rest of it later on. You can do that kind of thing. But if you're sitting across the table from someone who's insisting that 2 + 2 = 5, it's kind of hard to agree to compromise. Okay, let's say it's 4.5. That's just hard to do because it's not true. So you go online, and particularly the social media and all that, so much is just not true. It's just the falsehoods, the outright lies, the incendiary stuff. It's like an open sewer. But even if you're going on more mainstream type sources of information, a lot of it is just not accurate. And so it polarizes people when they think that things are true that just aren't, and get upset when the other side points out, wait a minute, that's just not so. So that part of that is people choosing their own reality, different realities that tend to be polarizing.
You were a 2-term governor, a 2-term senator in the state. Has the electorate changed, or has the party changed?
Well, let's see. The perception of the two parties has changed, and yes to both. So what's happened? Back in my day, I was fortunate to be elected governor twice. Frank O'Bannon was fortunate to be elected governor twice. Joe Kernan finished off his second term. It's been 25 years. Frank's last victory was in 2000. It's been a quarter of a century since we elected a Democratic governor. And during my time as governor, the first 2 years I was in office, the state House of Representatives was split 50-50. The state Senate was split 26-24 Republican. My next 4 years as governor, we actually had a majority, 52-48, Democratic majority in the House of Representatives. Never did get the Senate, but it was close. Today, it's 70-30 Republican in the House. Think about that, from 50-50 to 70-30. The Senate, 40-10. The congressional delegate, there's not a single statewide elected Democrat, not one. And this congressional delegation is 7-2 Republican. So how did the electorate change? Our electorate has always been, at least in my adult lifetime, more conservative than liberal. That's just a fact. You can look at the polling data. It's anywhere from 40 to 15 to 40 to 20, something like that. But it's at least 2-to-1 conservative to liberal. But there's also a populist streak under that, where we tend to root for the little guy, the underdog. We're suspicious of too much concentration in the hands of, any large entity, whether it's a government or a large corporation or, certainly an individual. So that always helped us out. But so the two changes in our state, I'll mention, are number one, there's been a huge decline in split ticket voting. My first race for governor, George H.W. Bush, the first President Bush, carried Indiana by 20%. Beat Michael Dukakis. We have tended to not vote for liberals from Massachusetts too much in our state.
No, not at all.
So he won by 20. Same day, same voters. I was elected governor by 6%. That's 26%. 1 out of every 4 voters voted for Bush and Bayh. And we used to get split ticket voting all the time. There was a theory back in those days that Republicans would walk in and they'd pull the lever, but they'd look for one Democrat they could vote for. Yeah, just because they thought, like Mitch Daniels says, competition is a healthy thing. There must be some Democrat out there I can support.
Got to be one.
Got to prove I'm open-minded. I'll find one. Maybe the guy running for dog catcher, but I'll find one. Today, people aren't doing that anymore. It's red team versus blue team. And it's just, I remember there was a woman interviewed, not in our state, but down in Alabama. There was a guy named Roy Moore who'd been accused by multiple people of child molestation. And he was running for the Senate. He got 49% of the vote, an accused child molester. And walked up to a woman and asked, well, ma'am, you're a Christian. She was coming out of church. How can you be supporting Roy Moore? He's been accused of child molestation, not once, but twice. And she said, well, that may be right, but at least he's no Democrat. So, that's just the view these days. It's like a religious thing. So, in any event, it's been the decline of split ticket voting. That's number one. Simultaneous with that, and I think as damaging, Gary, has been the view of the National Democratic Party, which is viewed as being much more liberal than perhaps it was back at that time. And remember, Bill Clinton ran as a moderate, that sort of thing. We had moderate Republicans. Heck, in southern Indiana, we even had some fairly conservative. We had moderate Democrats. We've even had some conservative Democrats in southern Indiana, and that's all changed. So at the national level, and I do think this hurts us in our state because we're a more conservative state, we are viewed as the liberal party. So we bear that burden. And simultaneously, if you look at the nature of along with the perceived liberalism of the national party in a conservative state, think about what I'm about to say. 60%, well more than half, 60% of Hoosier voters are non-college educated whites. Non-college educated whites. Big chunk of them used to belong to the Democratic Party. Auto workers, steel workers, small town businessmen.
Teamsters, you name it. Steel workers.
Yeah, all that. All through the trades and so forth. And small town businessmen, independent farmers, all across. Heck, I used to carry counties all across southern Indiana. My father carried a fair number of them too. Bill Clinton would have carried some of those counties. Now, when they look at the National Democratic Party, they think that the National Democratic Party cares about everybody except them.
Yeah.
And so they've kind of concluded, well, they just don't care about us much. And so they've fallen in love with Donald Trump, which I think is a great tragedy. But it did take some political malpractice by us Democrats to permit that to happen. I think, he's kind of been sort of the Pied Piper, taking them down a road. But it took us allowing some of that to happen.
Well, we're running out of time, but I really want to give you the opportunity here.
Well, we can take a few more minutes.
Take a few minutes then and talk about our former First Lady, your wife, and that just gorgeous memorial, the outdoor classroom that has been built in her honor.
Well, thank you, Gary. You couldn't ask me a nicer question than that. Well, I had I'm going to get choked up here in a minute. I had the great privilege of being married to the most wonderful woman for 35 years. And to this day, she was the happiest, most loving, most giving person I've ever met. And she was a wonderful first lady. She cared about the people of our state. As a matter of fact, I've had so many people come up to me and say, oh, I met Mrs. Bayh here or there. And she was, just happy and positive and trying to help out. And she loved me. She loved our sons. She loved our state. And so we felt that a living memorial. We also established a scholarship, which I'm happy to tell you and the viewers, gives about, 4, 5, 6 scholarships down at the IU School of Public Service. It's called the O'Neill School. I'm old enough. We used to call it SPIA. but we give out scholarships to young people who want to go into public service someday to hopefully give them the chance to do that. Now, that's called the Susan and Evan Bayh Scholarship. The park in Indianapolis, which I encourage everybody who's out there watching this to go see, it's at Holiday Park, north side of Indianapolis, and Spring Mill, like around 61st, 2nd, running there. And they built this beautiful shelter. Gary, there have been weddings there, and they take kids, and Herb Simon was kind enough to endow some of this for the next 10 years. They take kids from the inner city schools out here where there are trees and plants, and it's just a more open environment so that they can see nature and learn about the environment and that sort of thing. And we just felt that that something like that continued to live on and give back to people so that they can go and sit there for a few moments and contemplate nature and maybe think about her that was the most fitting memorial. And so that's
just
what we
gorgeous.
did.
It's just gorgeous.
Whenever I'm home, I go there and I kind of place some flowers by her marker and say a little prayer.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I know a lot of people, a lot of Hoosiers still regard her as the First Lady of Indiana.
Hey, can I tell one more story?
Absolutely.
So I'm running for, it was either Secretary of State or Governor the first time, and I'm somewhere on the south border, somewhere on the south side, and I'm at a function, and they had a buffet line. So my strategy was always to go to the area in the buffet line just before you get your plate and your utensils, and I would shake people's hands. I figured, well, they can't get away from me there. And so I was shaking hands, and this one lady, she was getting on in years a little bit, looks up at me and holds onto my hand, and she says, "Young man, I'm voting for you." And I said, "Well, really, ma'am, I appreciate that. Can I ask you why?" And she said, "Yes." She said, "I've met your wife. It seems to me you did all right with the most important decision you'll ever make. I'll trust you with the other ones too." Which I really love that one.
You know, when I was running for Congress several years ago, I got almost the exact same thing. So we're both in good company there.
Well, one other story. Susan worked her way through college, and she took out student loans when she was in law school. She worked as a waitress then too, but couldn't make enough money to pay all those tuitions. So we paid off student loans for several years. But there was someone from Switzerland County, dear friend of mine, Mike Jones. If you're watching this, Mike, long-time county chairman, district chairman down there, great guy. Susan went down there to represent me once, and he told me that he said they thought you were fine, but they thought she was great. And just given her your bubbly personality. And they said what really won them over was at the end of the dinner, I guess it was early in my governor's years, at the end of the dinner, the first lady of the state of Indiana went back into the kitchen and helped the other ladies wash the dishes.
Wow.
Yeah. She was just that kind of person.
My wife tells me to do the dishes.
Well, if I'd been there, Gary, she might have told me the same thing.
Real quick, just offer some advice right now. If someone outside of Indianapolis or Bloomington or South Bend is thinking about running for office as a Democrat or is a voter outside of those areas, give them some advice on, what they should do to help get the Democrat Party back in Indiana back to relevance.
Well, we can do that, Gary. I think we can, and we will win again. It won't be easy. I mean, Donald Trump carried our state by 20%. And as I mentioned just earlier, we've not had a track record of electoral success in recent years. Now, that can be because the Republicans are running fabulously good candidates.
No, that's not it.
I don't think that's it. It can be because we're running really awful candidates. I don't think
that's not it either.
I don't think that's it most of the time. Or it can be that we're misreading the concerns of the voters. And our message, at least the National Democratic Party message, is just not resonating with, 85 of the counties in our state. And so this may sound kind of basic, but I think it is. You got to meet the voters where they are. And that means, what do voters care about most? We lost the last election more than anything else because of the economy in general and inflation in particular. The price of milk, butter, eggs, travel, everything at shelter was going up. And so talk about bread and butter economic issues. Talk about why Democrats want to help create good jobs and help businesses grow and help wages, real wages rise, and that we understand that most of that comes from the private sector, a lot of it from small businesses, and that's what we want to do, help entrepreneurs, small business people grow, expand, pursue the American dream. Talk about that. Talk about how we can be fiscally responsible. A lot of folks in our state think the first thing Democrats want to do is go out and raise their taxes. Now, that's not true, but a lot of people think that, and some of that's coming from the national level. So tell them we're going to be good stewards of the taxpayers' money. There are occasionally examples of that in the state house where that's not happening. This whole Doge thing in Washington is obviously they're using a meat axe. But if,
chainsaw.
Chainsaw, literally a chainsaw. And look, it's stupid and wrong to fire people who give veterans benefits or are researching to cure cancer, or if they blow up the Social Security system and grandpa and grandma are getting their Social Security check, or they take a meat axe to Medicaid. Medicaid seems like it's becoming a whipping boy, but when I was governor, and I think still today, Medicaid is the largest item in the state budget, and the largest part of Medicaid are nursing homes.
Yeah.
And these are senior citizens living in nursing homes.
3/4, I believe, 75% of nursing home patients are on Medicaid.
Yeah, what are they going to do?
41% of the births in Indiana.
What are they going to do? Kick them out into the hallway? Throw them? Come on. You can't do that. But at the same time, as Democrats, look, if doing away with the penny saves us some money, well, okay. Back in Ronald Reagan's time, I remember he found an example of the $700 toilet seat. Okay, well, something like that exists. Do away with it. If somebody's got a no-show job or, is sleeping on the job, okay, we can't be having that. So we got to show people. As a matter of fact, Gary, we provided more money for public schools every year when I was governor. My last 2 years when we were flush, we provided good increases. Same for higher ed. We expanded Medicaid. We did more environmental programs. We did a lot of good things. But first, we balanced the budget. And because the economy was strong and we kept spending in check during the lean years, we were able to provide those increases and leave the state with a significant surplus. My point is that if you want to have progressive governance, if you want to do good things like that 21st century scholars, I mentioned about, it's got to be built on a strong and stable financial basis. And so those of us who think that we have a collective responsibility to provide opportunity for those to make the most of their own lives. Now, they got to have personal responsibility too. We're not just giving out handouts, but give them an opportunity to make more of their lives. We should complain the most when there's waste out there, because the Republicans use that to undermine the whole notion of government and helping anybody, anytime. And that's not right. So in any event, stand for economic growth, stand for being fiscally responsible, and, let people know that we, the last thing I'll say about all this is some of it is attitudinal. Again, the impression in large parts of our state is that national Democrats on the two coasts look down their noses at people like Hoosiers, and they're morally superior, saying, well, if you disagree with me on, happen to own a gun, or if you're faithful and go to church and that kind of thing, well, they look down their noses. They're morally superior. They're intellectually condescending, which is, we can't have an honest debate about things. If you agree with me, if you disagree with me, well, there's something wrong with you. But that, kind of runs against the whole notion of free speech we have in this country. So we got to have a better way of communicating with people where we know where they live. We're just like they are. We're not a bunch of weirdos from the two coasts. And we embrace people of faith. We embrace sportsmen. We embrace, small town folks, rural folks. Because a lot of us, me included, I was born on a farm. And so we got to speak to those people and not speak down to them, and let them know that we understand their lifestyles, and many of us lead that lifestyle too.
Very sage advice.
Well, I did lose my last election, so you should take that into consideration. But Trump was carrying the state by 18% that night, so maybe they had something to do. But I just,
hey, I've been there.
So the last thing I'll say, Gary, and this is to the folks who are watching this, who are among the most stalwart supporters and activists in our party. The first thing I'd like to say is thank you. Thank you for sticking with us through the lean years, the tough years when the going has been, it's like we're running straight uphill. So thank you. But the second thing is, it's going to require us to do something that's really hard. and that's compromise a little bit. But somewhere along the line, the word compromise, without which we wouldn't even have a country or a state of Indiana, became a dirty word. Instead, back in the day, it used to be synonymous with statesmanship. Well, you get people like my father and others together, and they kind of come, and everybody gets something, and they work out the differences, and they compromise, right? Well, that's a good thing. That's what we want. Now, no. For too often, the most zealous supporters in both parties say, no, you can't work with those people on anything. You can't agree with them on anything. And it's 100% or nothing. But, if you take a 100% or nothing approach, you better be prepared to get nothing a whole lot of the time, and particularly as Democrats in Indiana. So we have to stand on our principles. No question about that. Women's right to choose, for example, that's something that we got to stand strong on. And some of those other things. But from time to time, too, we got to say, okay, let's not lead with our chins here. Let's stand for those things that most Hoosiers are focused on, which I meant are good jobs at good wages, educational opportunity, affordable health care, sound retirement. And then we can argue about some of this cultural stuff later on, because the Republicans like to beat us around the head with that. And let's not take our eye off the ball and let them do that.
Well, Senator, thank you for joining us today. By the way, looking good for 69 years old.
Well,
and, we'll have to do this again sometime.
As your readers can observe, both my sons look better than me because they got some of their mom in them. But thank you.
He's Evan Bayh. I'm Gary Snyder. This is the SnydeReport podcast.